So is this reasonably priced Nikon Z-mount 28mm f2.8 lens good enough to knock my trusty 2470 f2.8 out of my favourite lens spot? Watch on to find out as we look at how it performed on a one camera, one lens trip up to London recently. So why am I looking at a 28mm lens? Well, when I had my D850, my favourite lens was my 2470 f2.8, and that's similar with the Z series cameras that I had, except I've got the Z-mount equivalent, which is much quieter. I like the IQ, the focus speed, the weather sealing, its versatility in terms of focal length, its low light performance and its VR. I also like its ruggedness. The only time I've ever had to send a lens in for repair was when I dropped my 2470 f-mount lens onto the steel deck of a boat in Iceland. Luckily it only required minor repairs, so that proved to me its ruggedness. But it is a bit big and heavy and imposing for some situations. Even when using the 2470 f4 with the Z8, you can see people becoming self-aware around you. So street photography, city photography, urban photography can become a bit of an issue. On my D850, I had an f-mount 50mm f1.8D lens. It weighed about 155 grams, it was quite compact, and actually it only cost me about £160, and it gave great results. I used to marry it up with my D850, perhaps when I was traveling or when I was going into somewhere where I knew I was going to be doing street photography, because it really worked well. Now with my Z series, I have a 50mm f1.8 lens, the S-line lens. It's a great lens, it's optically very clean, but it's bigger, heavier than that old f-mount 50mm lens. And I tried using the 50mm lens in a street photography situation, and it wasn't working quite as well in terms of focal length and its size and weight. There's probably a reason why the iPhone 1x lens is a 24mm lens, and with my Fuji X-T20 I had a 28mm Pancake lens that I loved for its portability and focal length. So when Nikon announced the 26mm Pancake Z-mount lens on their roadmap, I was really interested. It looked great on paper, but it also got me thinking about the 28mm lens as well. As you can see from their specs, they're pretty close, even in terms of the dimensions between that Pancake lens and the 28mm muffin lens, especially when you add the lens hood to the 26mm lens, which is required to be able to put a filter on the front. Also, as you can see, the 26mm has a single silent wave motor, whereas the 28mm has a dual silent wave motor. And what I did find from testing the 26mm when it was released is that it's a little noisier than when you're focusing. It has a sort of clicking noise when the focus motor is working. Now, it's not a massive issue, but you may notice it in video, which is quite important for me. Equally, the 28mm lens has a plastic mount, whereas the 26mm has a metal mount. And then there's the price, where the 28mm quite obviously wins out, as it's only half the price of the 26mm lens. So for me, it made sense to try the 28mm and test it further. So let's start with size and weight, which are quite important drivers in my decision in particular. Compared to the 2470, it's noticeably more compact on the Z8. And as you can probably see here on the Z6, it's almost pocket size in nature. When we come on to weight, well, with the Z8, it comes in at about just over a kilo in weight versus just over 1700 grams with the 2470 f2.8, and with the Z6 it's a really manageable 830 grams. So it's noticeable, but there is a slight downside in terms of balance. With the light lens and the heavier Z8 camera in particular, it becomes very back heavy. Now this is less of a problem with stills, where you've perhaps got the camera up against your eye most times. But with videography, where you're often holding the camera away from your body, it can pull the back of the camera down, which if you're using a cage with a handle on the top, if you have the handle the wrong way round, it can mean the camera is prone to slide out of your hand. So having the handle the right way round is really important. Overall though, the size makes both the Z8 and Z6 more on the lowdown, which is great for when you're in street photography mode. So let's take a look at some of the images and have a look at the performance of the 28mm lens paired up with my Z8. I started my one camera, one lens walk around the O2 Peninsula in the east of London. I took the cable car across the river and then came back into central London. It was a nice sunny day. There's quite a lot of colour around that area and some interesting architecture where we can test out the lens on certain different subjects. So with this first image, I was looking to test the focusing speed of the lens. I picked this because of the geometric pattern. With the 28mm lens, I could get the plants in the foreground, although they're a little scrappy, and the 3 circular windows at the top. I shot at 1/6400th of a second, that's quite a mouthful, at f2.8 and ISO 100. The light was quite bright, it was directional coming from the top left hand corner of the image, and I waited for a person to come along to test the lens and how quickly it would focus on them. I managed to focus on the person as they went between the plants, and the lens was pretty quick at focusing, as you can see, captured them really nicely. Equally, I could test the vignetting on the lens, and what I found was there was very little vignetting, just a small amount in the corners, which you'd expect from perhaps a lens at this price point, but it was a lot less than I thought there might be. Now, after a quick bit of manipulation, a little bit of Silver FX work here, you can see it came up with a pretty good image, black and white image, for a lens of this nature. So I turned round, and behind me was an electricity substation which had been painted in bright colours. It had some lovely vertical lines and horizontal lines, which was great for testing how much distortion there was going to be on this lens. So in this next image, which is straight out of the camera, I'd underexposed it by 2/3 of a stop. And what I wanted to really do was look at how much distortion. So if we turn on the loop overlay, and what we can see is actually the horizontal lines are pretty horizontal. The vertical lines, there's a small amount of distortion, but not much. Could well be my positioning was slightly out, but with a very small amount of adjustment, you can see we can get those vertical lines, those horizontal lines pretty much true. The sign in the middle there did have a slight bow in it, which is why the top and bottom lines aren't exactly in perfect horizontal. But this is, really important for architecture. It's also important if you're using the lens with people in the frame, and what I've found is that there's very little distortion of people's faces, for example, with this lens, which makes it great and a very versatile lens. With this shot, I also had a look at focus breathing, and what I found was there's very little focus breathing with this lens, which is really good as well. Now, I really wanted to stress test another aspect of this lens, which was the IQ, and this next shot is straight into the midday sun. So let's turn the grid off. And this is the roof of the O2. It's a white canvas reflective roof, and we've got the midday sun, and I'm shooting straight into it, and you can see there's people walking over the roof of the O2, which is something you can do there. They're silhouetted in this image. It's a real challenge for the camera and for the lens. I underexposed by 1 2/3 stops here, and even with that we shot at 1/8000th of a second, f8 at ISO 100. It's a pretty extreme test, And with a little bit of Lightroom adjustment, what you can see is that we could bring the sky down a little bit, the roof up a little bit, bring the color back out of those posts, and you can start to see there's quite a nice starburst coming out from the sun. So again, with a little bit of manipulation, this lens was able to create some really great images. There was nothing really untoward that I was finding for a lens at this price point with these images. And whilst not artistically brilliant images, it did allow me to really test the lens at the extremes. So a few images there to show how the lens performs, and I was quite impressed. If I'd had my 2470 f2.8, would the images have been noticeably better? Well, if I'm honest, probably not unless I was pixel peeping. Maybe there would have been more detail in that last shot in the shadows, and it would be perhaps marginally crisper if you zoomed in. So let's start at the wider end. To get the same coverage as the 26mm lens, I'd have to step back by about half a meter or one pace. And I'd have to step back perhaps another pace or so for the 24mm equivalent. So I can use my feet for most situations to get the right shot. Where it might be a challenge would be perhaps where I wanted to capture a shot like this one of Blackfriars Bridge and the construction site for the new Thames sewer next to it. Not sure why I'd want a picture like that, but it was a great way of testing. I could step back, but there would probably be people and other foreground clutter in the image. But it's easy enough with modern technology to stitch together images. So what I did here, just to prove the concept, is I took 3 images that were overlapping and stitched them together in Lightroom, something that took virtually no time at all and very little effort. If we now flip to the longer end, then I grew up through the age of film, and I still try to compose and shoot for images straight out of the camera. Now with a prime lens, I know I'm going to have to compromise that approach a little bit in certain situations. So having tested different aspects of the lens performance from a technical perspective, what can it achieve in the real world? As you can see from the last 2 images, it's possible to get in the thick of it from a street perspective, but equally it's a good lens for wider shots in a street context as well. That 28mm focal length is a real good sweet spot for many different situations. So it's light, it's discreet, and it's reasonably priced. So has it knocked my 2470 f2.8 off the top spot in my kit bag? Well, yes and no. If I'm going to be doing street photography, it'll be on my camera or in my kit bag. Equally, it's light enough to carry as a spare lens just in case. Equally, I haven't talked about video. And with the 28mm lens on my Z6, the weight means that I can quite easily capture video of myself when I'm out for these kind of videos. I know that if I hold the camera and lens out at about arm's length, I'm pretty much guaranteed to be in the frame and in focus. Hopefully you can just about see it if I hold it in front of my face, but it's a great focal length for videos like this. But the 2470 f2.8 is just such a versatile lens in most situations. It's worth the weight and size penalty for me in many situations. As an example, I was doing a shoot last week and I couldn't choose where I stood, and therefore it was the 2470 that was on my Z8 for that particular opportunity. But all of this said, I think the Z-mount 28mm f2.8 lens is an absolute bargain of a lens at just over £200 here in the UK. And I'm really glad I've got one now because I'm going to be using it in many different situations, particularly street photography, where it perhaps expands the capabilities of the Z8 by making it a bit more on the lowdown for a very affordable price point. What's your favourite reasonably priced lens? What are you keeping your kit bag as your spare lens? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, it'd be great to see you on a future video.